limits, but I'm not sure if we got that yet. So we are live. Good morning, Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. Happy birthday to my sister. And we are working on the T-bill today, as long as, well, at least for the foreseeable next 4 to 5 hours or more. And I guess one place to start, I didn't see the time on the email. I didn't look in there. There were some suggestions last night. I don't know if you were able to work out some updated language, or do you need more time on that? Representative Lally, for the agency.
We have it.
Damien,
Yes.
are we ready to show it to everybody else?
Yeah.
Let's start there then.
Okay.
If that works for you.
Just looking.
Unless you have another one.
I'm sure it's fine.
Or let me put that into just a second. I'll put that language into the draft.
Great. Okay. Great. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much.
Lynn, could you make me a co-host, please?
Will this be different than what's posted on our page now, if you added something to it? To,
Yep.
Can you
try?
I will. Yep.
Please.
Yes, we're.
All right. So let me share the screen here. For the record, I'm Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So yesterday, if you remember, we were looking at the provisions of the Vermont statutes relating to procedures for establishing traffic calming measures. Establishing speed limits, and the proposal overnight. It was to also identify potential opportunities to simplify and clarify those provisions to assist municipalities in meeting local needs, including safety and context sensitivity. See that there?
Page is that, Damien?
This is on page 2 of, and this is, I have not gotten this to the committee yet. So if you
Okay.
just bear with me here, I will send it to the committee. But yeah. sent that off. I know that because we're without Gabby this morning, we've got a little bit of a delay on getting things posted. So just bear with us here, but we've got the language up on the screen here, at least for you to look at. So were there other questions on this?
What's the main change from yesterday to today?
The main change from yesterday to today was that 3 here used to be one long sentence that said, examine the provisions in the Vermont statutes related to the procedures for establishing speed limits and identify potential opportunities to simplify and clarify those provisions. And then the language that's been added is to assist municipalities in meeting local needs, including safety and context sensitivity. I think we had to assist municipalities in meeting local needs yesterday. We've added including safety and context sensitivity.
Representative Allen.
I just wanted to say, I really appreciate that you kind of broke those down into 2 different tasks. I think that was, because they are the 2 different approaches and they sort of take 2 different pathways. And I think that what really captures the, what we're after and hopefully provides direction that everybody will find helpful.
Representative Burke.
And just to add to that, my concern was that, people are gonna be looking at speed limits. Oh, okay, well, could we limit the speed limit? No, we can't. Just, and to be able to look at the whole picture, maybe it's not speed, maybe it's something else. It's some kind of street design, maybe it's whatever. And it just sort of opens the door for not just looking at speed itself, but looking at the whole picture. Context sensitive.
Representative.
Yeah, I mean, I've been speaking for a few years now on how can we get in our town as 116 enters, how can we get traffic calm? And I would like to have done more, but this is a, incremental move toward totally understanding how speed limits are set. And I'm hoping we get a good amount of information back that says, here is how we can help towns like Heinsberg that want to reduce the speeds and make it safer. So it's an incremental step in that direction.
Okay, I did ask Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Gabrielle is not with us. She worked on it yesterday. It's not on the agenda, but I did ask her yesterday to put on the agenda, and with the translation between that to Megan to Lynn. I want to be very clear. Vermont League of Cities and Towns is on the witness list for this and for the local options tax. It's not updated because of personnel change, not because we don't generally take questions from the audience except from the agency, JFO or Ledge Council. So it will be updated because I did ask for it to update it, but with the situations that happened last night, it's not there, but we do not generally take comments from there. But I would ask you to speak on this because of that. I asked you to be on the witness list for this morning. If you would like to speak to the language in the piece real quick, I would appreciate it.
For the record, Josh Hanford, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I think the change is fine. It works. I think the most important part in all of this language is about the recommendations for legislative action. Between 10 years as deputy commissioner or commissioner of housing development, probably submitted over 100 reports, legislative reports. And if they don't have a legislative sort of recommendation to take action, I'm not sure if that information is really able to be absorbed and addressed and put into action, because there's so much coming at you guys from so many different places. And so that's the most valuable part of this.
Okay. Thank you. The agency submitted the language or helped work with it, so I don't know if they wanted it. We're all set. Representative Lally,
Yeah.
Like to, or not, I perhaps.
I would make a motion that we put this in our T bill.
All those in favor, a little thumbs up time. Okay. Instruct our alleged counsel to add it to the next draft of T-bill that we'll be looking at later today, later this morning. I think that there is language, we want to move on to the local option tax piece. The language that we saw last week related to specifically the idea that above the pilot fund being fully funded, and when it is all of the pieces that are on there that it has to go to, and there is left in a balance, but as the increase that comes in annually, not to touch the balance that's there, not to touch it unless it's already fully funded in all the towns that have pilot payments, or with prisons, with forests, with the different provisions. After everything is paid, after everything is collected, and for that annual amount that comes in, not the surplus, not any of the other pieces, moving forward, we are looking as in this language to take 50% of that additional and over and above on an annual basis and send back through town highway aid to those communities, to the town highway program to help towns with the increasing costs that they face with the climate mitigation struggles, maintenance and peace. And it's what I would like to see us do is that we always tried as a committee to find a way to help towns. And last year we did it through the inflation escalator. And this year we know that 12 more towns, 19 considered it, 12 more towns have added a local option tax that will be coming. And I think that given that this is a special fund and that it came from towns and we have a network to support, that I think that that's the direction that I'd like to see the committee go. I know that we've been there. I asked Representative Pouch to update us on, perhaps if you don't mind, attended their rural caucus this morning, where it was discussed further.
Well, Rep White was there too. She's a member. So just generally, I think generally the rural caucus would like to see what's the state takes from local option tax go back to the towns. There was discussion of using it for one-time items for, other things that really should come out of the general budget, general fund. So I think there was generally some agreement that this isn't a bad approach. They did ask why 50% of the surplus, why not 100%? So I think that shows some support for it. And just to clarify, we had a little discussion. I had asked the question, is it 50% of what's left in the balance of the funds surplus, or 50% of what was surplus per year collected? And this is per year, so it's not gonna reduce the fund balance that's in there necessarily. It will just take 50% of what was collected that year over and above what was required.
I'd like to go to Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns at this point for comment, whether we want to switch chairs or not, and then you'll be able to bring up the language for questions, particularly right after. Absolutely.
For the record, Josh Hanford, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I also spoke to the rural caucus this morning with Senator Westman. We had a pretty lengthy discussion just about what the local option tax process is, why there's so many more towns adopting it, which is because the law changed a couple of years ago to allow towns to vote to adopt local option tax at the voter level and not have to submit a charter change, which had been the requirement up until a couple of years ago. Since then, we've seen 7 towns the very first year approve local option tax, and last year it was actually 13 out of the 20 that had it on, and some of those other towns that didn't approve it were very close votes. The facts on the ground have changed. Even smaller communities can benefit since the Wayfair decision. All online purchases collect sales tax, so even the smallest towns, some in Windham County, really small towns are adopting local option tax. And even though it's not a huge revenue source in a small budget, it's a big difference. Majority of the municipalities in Vermont, their largest budget item is transportation. So this is a very important conversation. We know the situation, you know better than most, you know, how we're not drawing down all of our federal match. The transportation budget is in kind of a tailspin because of what we use to fund it. And this is a small step in the right direction to correct it. I would not be honest if the league didn't wish there were other options. And this isn't our first choice. You know, the local option tax is something that voters at the local level approve. They keep 75% and they send 25% to the state to pay for the pilot funds, which is all the law says at this point. Payment in lieu of taxes for those municipalities that host state buildings and properties. You received an overview of that the other day. The law says nothing about using it for one-time funds here and there. The last couple of years, most of those one-time expenditures out of it have been for tax expenditures that the state used to pay out of its general fund. It wasn't new additive money for municipalities. We're very offended by that, concerned by that. Even the pilot payments that the state is paying property taxes in lieu of taxes is still coming from the local taxes raised at the municipal level. So the concept of this in general is not returning the funds to the municipalities that have chosen to raise taxes on themselves. However, we don't have any other, there isn't other proposals for us to support or oppose in regards to this, in regards to returning all of the surplus back to municipalities and letting them choose what to do with it. That's not on the table. That would be our first choice. Also, there isn't a discussion in the tax bills about reducing the percentage from 75 to 25 so that there isn't a surplus. We would also prefer that to be the first choice. But this option of returning 50% of the surplus to towns to enhance the town highway aid is something that benefits our members and we can support. Like I said, it's not our first choice, but there is a formula that fairly distributes this to municipalities. Every municipality benefits based on their number of road mileage, class 1, 2, and 3. So it is a fair distribution. We're up to 50 municipalities with local option tax now. I suspect that there's going to be a half a dozen or more each year. And since the law that the voters in the towns are evaluating whether to approve this says nothing about expending the surplus on sort of whatever idea comes out of the legislature each year, at least adopting something like this that says 50% of the surplus shall go to town highway aid will help municipalities understand and their voters understand where the surplus is going. Because I think if you did a poll, they would not suspect that there's been a surplus for 3 years of money that's been over collected with no plan to spend it. And when they're voting on it, they didn't vote on that money doing anything other than paying the pilot obligations. And so at least this would have a chance for the voters at the local level to understand, because it's in law where a portion of this pilot payment goes. And so from that perspective, support the language you're considering as a place to more rationally use this overpayment of pilot funds from local taxes, and recognize that, you know, all municipalities will benefit in at least a fair way. And hopefully that will also generate conversations in other municipalities, knowing that they have major budget challenges in the transportation sector. I mean, you know, I know stats from the town of Bennington that their transportation budget this year is below what it was in 2017 by more than half. So there are real challenges out there in transportation budgets at the local level. And this is a start of a conversation to help address that. So appreciate the effort.
I appreciate your flexibility to come in this morning and work through it. Could you comment on your thoughts about why or where you're at with the need of, in terms of distributing support for the entire network as opposed to just the originating towns getting the money back.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there is some tension there between those municipalities that raise the local option tax and those that benefit. The fact is, we've already sort of made that decision in the law. The towns that adopt local option tax aren't necessarily the same towns that benefit from the pilot payment. There's some overlap, but there's many more towns that benefit from pilot payments that don't raise local option tax. So we've already sort of crossed this bridge in some ways, and that the town highway aid formula, one could argue, is even more fair than that distribution. Knowing that some smaller towns might not raise that much local option tax, but they still have road needs. And then on the flip side, you have towns like a Stowe that raises substantial local option tax, and they share it with the entire state, just like they would suggest they share their property taxes quite generously with the state. It's also true that they have a pretty extensive road network that needs lots of support and aid. So they will also benefit for some percentage of the new town highway aid that is being shared with the rest of the state, where they're not now. If we do nothing like this with the surplus, they're not benefiting from what they're raising to support their town highway needs in any way.
Representative McCoy?
I would also argue that the surrounding towns, for example, around Stowe, are actually paying that local option tax when they go and shop in Stowe, or they go and shop in the other towns, because they don't have that in the small communities. They don't have a local grocery store, and they don't have retail to go shopping. So they are, citizens are putting in to the local option tax. So I think it's a fair distribution for the whole state.
That's absolutely true. A lot of towns are feeder towns. They have networks to maintain. It's also true that many small towns have increased deliveries, from online purchases, more and heavier trucks driving on class 3 roads to deliver parcels that we didn't have 20 years ago. Those that have adopted local option tax with the online sales are at least contributing to that. And that would be, an argument for towns and the voters to decide themselves whether that increased road maintenance and costs because of home deliveries, because they don't have a commercial center, is worth a local option tax, and directing that money to help support and maintain those road networks, I think is a increasing conversation that I hear when we gather our transportation policy committee every 2 years to set our VLCT's priorities for transportation. We take volunteers from all size communities to work all summer on what our policies are in the transportation field. And I heard that 2 summers ago for the first time from a number of smaller communities, that their road commissioners, their road foremans, their actual people that are maintaining it, seeing a direct correlation to more frequent and heavier vehicles on roads that they didn't see in the past.
Representative Burke?
A little off topic, but you mentioned it. I mean, I had been a proponent of actually looking into the delivery fee. So, later, so I'm hoping that sometime down the line, we might at least explore the option, because we're talking about the trucks turning the road, things like that, but the real thing that's happening. So to bring that up.
Representative White?
And just a comment on that, I think the committee is aware, but we've got the towns who have these dirt roads, which are getting more use and heavier use from deliveries. We've also got a network of private roads, which are paid for by individuals and associations, which are, those bills are just continuing to go up every year. So those citizens, I speak for myself, I live on a private road where our biggest expense is trying to keep our road drivable. And with, climate change, more freeze and thaws, more deliveries, it's just, again, it's expenses are going up and nobody's paying for that except for citizens.
Yeah, great comments both. Speaking of study committees, there was a study committee a couple of years ago that VLCT was on. I was represented looking at revenue options for public transit, and the parcel fee came up as that one of those areas to consider. And our comment was, that might be an appropriate source. Not for us to decide, but if it only goes to all public transit, it's not addressing the need, because those public transit buses also drive on the municipal roads and the bridges. And if they can't drive on bridges that are waitlisted or roads that are maintained during the mud season, that public transit system doesn't work either. So that, a fair distribution of any sort of new revenue to the transportation system across town highways would always be our position. It can't just go to one sector of transportation, because as we've said, whether you drive a car to work or school, you take a public bus to work or school, or you walk to work or school, you're using municipal transportation networks. And any one sector zeroing out for a certain type of revenue doesn't address all the needs. It's really an across the board revenue source for the whole system that's needed at this point.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in. Thanks for your piece. Anybody have any other questions or comments?
Sound good. Make a motion to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could,
We want to go over it again, we can. I know we did.
Oh, no, I was just about to
before,
make
but-
it.
Well, Damien, maybe you can bring it up. Come up and bring it up, and then we'll go to Representative Tomlinson's question at the same time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand kind of the proposed formula and wondering if, based on the data shared by JFO yesterday, if we could have an example of like how much of the fund would go to town highway aid based on like FY26 over FY27. Is that possible? Because I'm just not really following exactly how this amount of money is being calculated that would go to town highway. I don't know who that question is to.
Okay.
Logan.
I think for a second.
So my,
He's given.
we'll go there. I just want to, so from what at least, and then so I want to make sure that I understand it as well, but my perception is the projected revenues are going to go from 14.8 to 16.2 next year. We're not going to affect the budget. By the way, the effective date is not to address the budget for this year. It would be to start fiscal year of next year. And the revenue in this, the consensus revenue from the JFO says the pilot's going to go from 14.8, 14.9 to 16.2. So the revenue is expected that the 25% share of the local option tax will increase by about $1.3 million. And if that were the case, then the estimated expenses for the pilot are going to come across basically at the same. With that $1.3 million in increase, it would be about $675,000 to go back to town highway aid. Is the way I understand it. But we're going to look to Logan for that. I don't mind taking a comment here since you're still on.
It's just a point of information, Josh Henford again. The actual dollar amount, I don't think anyone can answer because it's based on a budget that's not yet approved for some of the uses in there. So the percentage would be based on decisions that this body makes between now and adjournment.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to understand, like, if it's based on the, anyway, maybe it's worth looking at with Logan, like the estimated fund balance versus the actual projection of revenue, like the increase in revenue versus the balance, which is different. So, because what I'm seeing is like the estimated fund balance at end of FY26 to the estimated fund balance at the end of FY27, that's like a $40,000 increase. as opposed to this increase in the revenue because of the additional things that we're spending it on. Anyway, I'm just trying to understand because there was a point earlier that it wouldn't affect the fund balance of the pilot fund, but
I would
that's,
say that that is not my intention to go after the balance, but what I'm hearing is that other areas, other groups, and the law is not set yet. Other people have already pilfered this fund and there's other people coming at it.
Yeah.
Maybe less there than what we hope. We don't have an exact figure, but my intention is that we will take half of that increase
the half of the increase
on
in
a per
the,
annual, a new revenue, half of the
in
new
the
revenue
revenue.
will
Okay,
go to, because the pilot isn't going to change by the pilot itself. These
Yeah.
other one-timers and these other pieces keep
Yeah.
coming in on it. We're trying to go after the increase in new revenue from the additional towns,
Mhm.
50% of that.
The revenue, not the
But
balance.
other groups are going after this fund and using it for other things, and I'm suggesting we don't want to be in that fight or not, or maybe we should. I'm saying we're trying to put a predictable piece to build on the budget moving forward, but I'm not trying to go into a fund that exists, the surplus right now.
Yeah, I think I understand now. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify which.
Representative Ford?
So I understand. We're not going after the balance that's there now. So going forward, if they're projected to be $1 point some odd million there, and we're asking for 50% of that going forward. So every year, whatever this pilot money comes in, we want to take 50% of it and put it towards town highway.
50% of the increasing revenues are above
Here,
where we are
correct.
now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is a good discussion. So we're not even considering what the underlying expenses.
No, I'm saying that the defined law of what the pilot is consistently the same year in and year out. We know how much property we're paying for. There is a slight adjustment with the CLA every year, and it goes up a slight amount, up or down a slight amount each year. But that number is flat. And the surplus has grown. Other laws and appropriations have gone after that money. I'm saying we know that the expense is whatever the number is, and we're getting new money in. I'm saying from this date out here, regardless of what other people do, we want 50% of the new money.
Okay, so we go along and we're 5 years, 8 years on, and we've basically exhausted the number of towns that are going to come in. So there won't be an increase unless there is a underlying increase in value of the taxed event. So anyway, this will go on for a period of time until such time that the towns and cities stop doing it. Well, sure it is, because you won't have any more addition.
Question, because it would be the intent that it would be 50% of the above the amount of the pilot. So if it gets to 4 million to 8 million to 10 million or some number,
Right.
and it levels out at 10 million, we're still would be getting 50% of the above the pilot expense.
Okay, so you're not just saying the increase from year to year, you're talking about, okay, gotcha.
I'm trying to say we're drawing a start point and moving forward, but
Gotcha.
I guess I'm saying that other appropriation will be going after other pieces of that money and the surplus. We're trying to put a stake of claim in the amount above the need of the pilot fund. I mean, I could say there's a whole bunch of other pieces to it. Like, I think that the fact that the prison one-time adjustment of $40,000 from 1997 money is absurd, that number should be dramatically higher and should have grown by inflation. And what are today's dollars of that? I think it's amazing that we think somehow that town's burden is the same money as it was in 1997, but I'm not a pilot expert, but I sure have some interest if I were to happen to come back to look at some of those things. I think that it's probably not that well understood that we've decided to use this town money to pay for listers that we used to pay out of the general fund, when I think it was pointed out that when they voted for it, they didn't expect that that's how the money was going to be used. I think that $40,000 number ought to be substantially higher. I think the towns that were shorted for years when we didn't have the fund fully funded should get their money back. Were shorted for only 3 years if we were able to pay it in full. But there hasn't been any discussion of giving the money that, in effect, the IOU that those towns have. So I guess you can feel my frustration that I think the entire area has been underrepresented from the town's view. And I am trying to push that one of our goals in the committee is to help towns. And I think there's a whole lot of injustices in this pilot and how it's been managed. I would be very clear. I think it's incredibly unfair to the towns. I'm trying to help us fight for the towns moving forward without getting into the fight of what happened before. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think you can see where I'm coming from.
I would agree in all those parts. It just, I want to make sure that I understood and that the sense was that you were going to run out of a rope after a while.
Well, then does the language actually reflect what you're talking about? That's a good question from my perspective. If we stop adding new towns, it doesn't mean that we'll stop getting, towns will stop getting 50% above the pilot cost. I'd go, does the language reflect that?
Yes. So the language in the bill provides that whatever the surplus is after you've paid out the pilot payments and the grand list stabilization payments, whatever that surplus is, that's available, 50% of that. And that's each year's revenues. So we're not talking about surplus remaining in the fund, because that can go up or down. And one of the pieces here too to keep in mind is that if you have a significant recession, you may see a year where there is no surplus revenue. And so that would pause these payments. But then the next year when revenues recover, these payments will be whatever 50% of whatever is above the amount that has to go out to make the pilot and grand list stabilization payments. And so if no new towns are adding local option tax, but they're all keeping the local option tax they have, as long as those tax revenues stay consistently above what the pilot payments and grand list stabilization payments are, you will see some revenue going to town highway aid.
I don't know if you were the line before. Representative Burke, then we'll come to Representative Pouch.
Did we hear this yesterday or not? Remember that? What's happening to the extra 50%? Is it just going into the fund?
The extra 50% would go into the fund. It can also be used one time by the legislature, but that also basically by putting some surplus into the fund, you're providing that there's something in the fund if you do have a downturn in tax revenues to ensure that towns are still getting those grand list stabilization and pilot tax payments. So, for example, if next year we only collected half of what we need to make the pilot payments and the grand list stabilization payments, the remainder of that would have to come out of the pilot special fund. If there's enough in there. And so this ensures that you're putting some into savings, similar to what you would do with your own income. You pay your bills, you pay for the things you want, and then you hopefully are putting some into savings too. That's the sort of model here.
Especially the grand list stabilization.
Right. That amount will go up and down over time. And the pilot payments will fluctuate too as the CLA adjustment and other things go on. But this is designed to basically say if your revenues meet the pilot and grand list stabilization payments and there's extra, we'll take 50% of that extra to put in the town highway aid and then divvy up among the towns. And Logan can give you a better idea of what those funds are projected to be. But it's designed not to put additional stress on the fund in a recession. But when revenues are good, it's designed to put those out to towns so that towns can do more with this money.
Yeah, I do support this. And I think, if we take away the one-time spending on this fund and it's left with just the pilot and the other items, with the added towns now adding in, I think there will be a surplus going forward. Even if it's, this next year, and half of it goes to town highway aid, that's a couple percent more. So that town highway aid is all state money. And it's it's gonna be always difficult to add more money to it, because people are gonna wanna use state money to get federal money. And we did add an inflation factor a couple years ago that added, 2.7% this last year. And then you put this to it, I think it at least keeps the town highway aid formula sort of from, falling way behind. It helps to just keep up with expenses, maybe not as much as needed, but I think it's critical for our municipalities, because they're hurting and they're unable to maintain what they have.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I just want to clarify, so looking at the chart from yesterday, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of legislated payments that the pilot fund is currently supposed to be paying: the general pilot, the correctional facilities pilot, the Newport and Springfield correctional facilities, and the municipal grand list stabilization. And then the other 3 costs we saw: telecoms, valuation, town highway, non-federal disasters, and reappraisal and listing payments. Those are all payments that the legislature has seen this money and decided we're going to take that money and put it in these buckets. So we're trying to prevent that from going forward. I guess my question is, are we sure we don't want to go after is not the right word, requests that we direct 50% of the current surplus as well as 50% of ongoing surplus? Because I mean, there is a pretty big surplus. I know that it sounds like it's good policy to keep a surplus, but $13 million is a lot of money, and that could really jumpstart this, the town highway funding. So I'm just proposing that, and I guess the other thing, which I thought was beneficial, is the Rural Caucus this morning was asking why are we not asking for 100%? I would be in favor of increasing our ask. Yeah, and let's just take it.
I appreciate your comments. I'm not sure if you're looking for me to respond. I love when we have a very solid nonpartisan issue that's out helping towns. And that's been a goal since I've, in the 2 years, finishing coming into our second year of being in this position. It's always been a held goal to find a way to help towns. I didn't ask the Ledge Council to go to that number because I'm trying to find a way that will put us into the discussion in a way, perhaps that would put us in a better bargaining position. That's certainly where my mindset would be. I don't know what else is going on in bills, and I don't know what else is going on in money committees. They've already shown that this money is being targeted, and my main goal is to get a stake into that argument for the towns, and I think there's a lot of support for that. I'm open to whatever we think is reasonable and possible, but I'm only trying to offer a reasonable solution. I did want to go to Logan if he wanted to make comments about anything that's money wise going on, but I also want to represent Lally first, or other comments to do that. I'm kind of open there. I don't know if you're wanting to let them help clarify any of the conversation, or if it's just to kind of confirm where we're at.
Yes, for the record, Logan McGrath, Trent Fiscal Office. As I understand the language, and Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong here, there are sort of 2 sections that you're accounting for when you're thinking about payments going out versus revenue coming in, and 50% of that would go to the towns for highway, as you mentioned. The one thing I flag is, and on the document that was presented yesterday, there's in line 8, the reappraisal and listing payments. As I understand it, the current language does not account for that, but that is an ongoing expense from the fund of $3.4 million. The language you have right now doesn't take that into effect. The difference between how much money would go to town highway is very different if you account for this additional $3 million or as it's currently written, would be roughly $1.7 million, would be 50% of the surplus. If you sort of do that math, you're only looking at a total surplus of like $3.5 million. So if you then subtract out the 3.4 for this new appropriation that occurred in the PAA, you're looking at a much smaller surplus. As it currently stands and with current estimated revenues, right, this is all just sort of a guess. If you took half of the surplus, not accounting for this $3.4 million going for the reappraisal and listing payments, the fund would be running a deficit essentially. If you took half of the surplus away and put it towards Town Highway 8, they would only have 1.7 thereabouts remaining, while they have $3.4 million that they have to spend on. So you would slowly decrease the fund, given current estimates. Again, the budget is still being worked on, nothing is set in stone, these are all estimates based on future forecasts. But that might be something that the committee wants to consider when they're proposing their language, is what do you actually account for when you're determining what the surplus every year is.
Thank you. Representative Allen?
Yeah, I guess, I'm a little worried about the perfect being the enemy of the good here. This seems like what we've been talking about. I'd love to know more about it to make a decision, but that's just my instinct right now. I feel like we have a very, very defensible position right now. The stake in the ground is a really good metaphor. And I think one of the most important things we've done this year is just making it everybody aware of, as I like to put it, the crisis that no one is paying attention to. I certainly have risked annoying people by talking about it that way many times this year. So I think that this seems like a very solid thing, and I just would love to know more about the pros and cons of asking for more, which I completely support in the abstract. So I think that's kind of where I am, if that makes sense.
Anybody have anything else? I would throw out that I'm not certain that the body really understands what we're doing with what I would call the town's money, but it's not. The law says 25% of it's the state's money. So the law does say it's the state's money to do what it wants to do with their 25% piece. But I am leaning towards the part that when they vote for the 75-25 split, they think that 25%, as we heard, is going to the pilot to help pay for where the prisons are, where the forests are, where the state buildings are. But we're way beyond that, and it's already been used for multiple other things that are not part of that original language. My goal is to force ourselves into this conversation. And if somebody wants to strip it back out, I'd like to see them defend it and have this conversation. Why we have created a situation that's not in the law to take the money that originally was set on 75-25 and not to the towns where it came, where there is a desperate need. I don't see anybody else, anywhere else, coming on with ideas to help town highways at the level. I don't want to, that's not fair. Beyond the proposals and the efforts, which I appreciate, that new revenue may be needed for that. And that's not a political reality right now. Nobody else is coming with solutions to help the towns. If I want to be fair to the retail delivery fees and the gas escalators and the other funds that we've looked at, but with the political reality, knowing that new revenue is not going to get through the building, I want to force a conversation as to why this money that we're already getting from towns isn't going back to the towns beyond after the obligation that was set. So that's where I'm going. I appreciate what you're saying. I think if we went and said we want half of or all of the 13 million and we wanted 100% of the additional money, I don't know that we would be taken as fair to the process of the other pieces that are out there, but that's me. I'm generally a compromise. That's why I also think it should be next year so that it can time for it to shake out. Also to drive the conversation of who else is going after this money. I don't know that I knew all of this money was taken out of here before. I think everybody in the whole building should know what we're doing with this money. I'm willing to push it through and have the money committees explain to me why. Explain to the floor why this isn't town money. That's where I'm coming from. And I'm looking for the support of the committee to help drive that conversation. I really don't think that people understand that fixing the T fund, which has been a tremendous work by a lot of people in this committee and beyond, doesn't fix any of the town highway needs, town structure needs. It does not help with that at all. There's no mechanism that increase in T funds helps the towns. The formula is the formula. We have to make an action every year. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have to make an action every year if we want to do more help to the town.
Well, we have the inflation.
Outside of
factor. Yeah, but.
Which we as a committee did last year because nobody else is looking out for the towns. And I don't want to say nobody, obviously the town, but in this building, for our relationship, that's what we're trying to do. And I'm hoping that everybody could go with it. If you want to make some changes to it, I'm open to that. I just was trying to find a position that I felt we could defend as wholeheartedly as I just did, or I think I tried to do.
Yeah, no, Logan brings up a good point. We probably should say what is the surplus. So I would probably recommend after the general pilot, the correction facilities pilot, the Newport and Springfield correction facilities, and the reappraisals and listing payments are fully satisfied. Anything above and beyond that should be considered a surplus. I think those are the core four. And then we can put our stake in the ground after those are unfunded because the rest are considered one-time funds. And the reappraisal might be considered a one-time, but it sounds like that's moving forward with a permanent stake in the ground. So, but I think that should be sort of like the baseline. Anything after that in the following years, then we know what the towns are going to get.
That's probably the practical reality where we're at.
Yeah.
I would say that I suspect I can hear the town saying, boy, how did that not become our money? But I think I'm trying to go in the direction of what's the practical world of some piece every year, incremental help.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I don't know. I'd like to hear what other people think. Representative White.
I'm wondering if Logan could give us a little bit more substance regarding the reappraisal and listing payments. Because I thought we heard that those had been paid for in the general fund, like it's 3.4 million in the BAA, 3.4 million proposed in the 27 budget. Are these payments expected to be at that rate going forward? And is that an appropriate and legislated use of the pilot in the first place? Or is that something that's been added this fiscal year? And
I don't know that I can speak to any of it. We'd have to have Ted back in, we might know Ted or Chris are more familiar with how and why that came about. I do know what you mentioned about it used to be paid from the general fund. And the BAA, they moved it to be paid from the pilot fund. I couldn't speak to it in more detail.
We did hear that it was not in the original pilot language.
Right. But they want it to land there. Right? This sounds okay.
right, I guess I'm questioning, is that something we want to support, or is that something that feels like it's outside of the intended?
My recommendation was to
support it for certainly 26 and 27. I mean, it's there,
well, I mean,
but going forward as well.
I would suspect that overall that a lot of people didn't understand what we just did to that piece. But it's not part of the original pilot language, but it is settled. And those are powers that are, straight on it, those are bigger than what I think we can take on, but I could be wrong in that perspective. I just want to make sure everybody else is going to spot.
No, I have one other, Logan, I didn't know whether you had a chance to check whether Rutland is part of the town highway aid program, knowing that both Rutland and Burlington have LOTs but don't share them with the state.
Yeah, both of those cities have received
They have received
money from
town highway aid.
And you can find all of it on the agency website. They have a document that will show you all the towns and all the money they've received on there.
Okay, because that also feels to me like if they're not sharing into the state that 25%, then I guess I question whether may need to benefit from town highway, but maybe that's just a bigger. It's confusing, that's too much.
I think that learning all the pieces of the pilot has been quite a positive for I'd take your comments.
Answer Representative White's question. Rutland and Burlington have special taxing authority, but the 1% local option tax that they have works the same way as everyone else's local option tax.
So it does come back to they do contribute that 25%.
Only the 1%. They have other taxing authority that they manage themselves and keep it all to themselves.
Okay, so they have an LOT plus.
They have
something
other
else.
tax rate.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
On the question of the reappraisal listing payments, the 3.4 million that was approved in the BAA and is under consideration in the 27, we would strongly object to having that permanently made. In fact, there's a letter going to the approach committee locking that in is above town highway aid before you calculate the 50%, essentially negates the value of this aid, certainly until a number of more revenue comes in. And we couldn't support that.
Representative Peterson.
Given the fact that a lot of these funds sort of develop surpluses, that allocation of monies to reappraisals, is that spent? I mean, are that obligated? See,
That's going over there.
yeah, okay, okay.
And the answer is yes. That was part of the BAA and that was.
No, I get that, but then are we getting it out the door? I
We've
mean,
already spent.
Yeah.
Last year, we already spent money and we're already spending it now on.
Yeah.
That's the testimony that we heard from
Right.
JFO yesterday from Ted. That it was already been spending and is continuing to be spent. So.
my only issue there, well, it doesn't matter, but the idea is that a lot of times we fund things, but then they don't spend it right in that year. And I just, no, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Anybody else? You want to ask? I guess the question I have right now is our vice chair is suggesting that we ask the Ledge Council to adjust the language, recognizing that this activity is already budgeted for.
I just want to go over the numbers again, because my understanding is that there was that 1.3 sort of included that reappraisal, right? So we took that out, so you're going to be higher than 1.3.
It would have been, we would be higher if they didn't have that expense. I guess we're expecting that they're going.
Yeah, I was trying to come to a proposal that we were doing the same thing. Did you anticipate that going forward too, or no? Because I was just like, I thought we were trying to
at
get.
some point that the cost of it, that would go eventually go away.
Yeah.
But I don't know that. I know that other people are going after that money. And
I was just doing the numbers in my head and I was like, those are the, the core four, anything after that would be considered a surplus. Because that's how you get to 1.3, right?
That
With this included, with the.
yes, with that included.
So that's why I was saying, all right, let's set those are what, needs to be paid out, and then anything after that going forward will be good, but it sounds like it's a little bit hard. So,
Well,
regardless of
I
that,
wish it
in or
wasn't
out,
there, but it is.
but, like I said, I'm just trying to make it more attractive because it's gonna be a hard sell when it goes right next door. And if we do or don't include that, it's really gonna make it upsetting one way or the other, so. I'm just trying to make it more appealing, give us a good shot to say, hey, we considered all the factors and we think this is the best avenue, but, if they're pushing for it over there and take it out. And then we said, all right, we want 50%. That's like strike two on us.
I'm expecting,
Yeah.
from my perspective,
Yeah.
I don't want to fight about it. I don't think we can win the fight on the 3.4. That's got to be paid. And then we get the.
That's what I was getting at. It's just like, all right, let's just put it in there.
Only for as it's currently allocated. In fact.
Yeah, through 27.
We'd have to deal with it after that.
Well, no, basically what I'm saying is that, the way this would be written is we're sort of setting what's
Yes,
pilot fund should
okay.
be funded at. So either we put it in or we don't, but unless we're just talking, doing it, you really can't do it year by year.
No, so if we don't include it,
Yeah,
we know we're gonna have a huge battle.
that'll, yes,
So it
right.
needs to be understood that that money's already been spoken for.
And are you saying, I'm sorry, like,
That's what I think, because I don't think we're going anywhere if we don't.
Yeah.
I think we lose the whole opportunity of the argument.
Yeah.
That's, I could be wrong. Maybe everybody wants to go to the floor and fight that, but we're gonna have to amend it back into our own bill because it's gonna come out. I mean, that's,
Oh, come on.
it's gonna come out next.
Yeah.
Maybe we should take a break. I don't know, but,
Yeah.
Representative White?
I just want to clarify, so Representative Corcoran, are you suggesting to keep reappraisal and listing payments in perpetuity or just through what we are seeing is in the proposed FY 27 budget?
No, all these would be in perpetuity because we're setting policy.
Yeah.
So you would have to say what is gonna be surplus.
Yeah.
You can't do that year by year. It would have to be set, but I guess maybe we should take a break to figure out what the actual goal is of them moving into the pilot. Was there, expectation was a 1 year thing? I mean, if that's the case, then I wouldn't include that in my motion. I would take it out and say, all right, we only have 3 that are figured in there. I just don't know the answer to that.
I thought we had heard that this typically came out of the general fund,
No, correct.
and now they're taking it from here.
No,
For this
year.
that's correct, but in them doing that, is that they're like planning for
Oh, is this a $3.4 million every year?
every year? I
It's
just
just an expense that goes on into
Yeah.
perpetuity. We
Yeah,
don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I just don't want to battle that issue. But if they're thinking it's just a 1 year, then I have no problem taking it out, but I just don't know their thought process behind what they would think when they put it in there,
It makes a huge difference. in the amount of money.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference in the amount of money that will go,
Yeah.
but it also makes a huge difference in what we will get any opportunity to move forward or none, is what.
Yeah.
What?
I would just propose, I am in full support of not changing what is currently proposed in the AA is done, but in FY 27, but FY 28 reiterating the 4 payments at the top and not the reappraisal and listing payments going forward. I mean, I suppose it could be rejected or amended, but I'd love to lead with that. Like, we're not going to ask you to change anything you're doing, but just going forward for fiscal year 28, that doesn't seem like an appropriate use of pilot surplus. Here's what we think is appropriate use.
I think that at this point, we're gonna take a 5-minute break so we can find out the answer to that question, whether it's an ongoing year after year
Yeah.
thing, or if this is a project that is going to end with the statewide reappraisal of everything. That's like, is that sort of what's going on there?
Yeah, like I said, I just, need to go down that road for that argument. Should go down, in my opinion, man, I know what you're saying, but it might get a little convoluted too. It's like, all right, we're gonna do it this year, and then the next year we're taking it out. Usually when you set something, you sort of set it. Yeah, man, like I said, I'm not wedded to it. I'm just trying to give us our best opportunity.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, I get it. They're money
Yeah.
committee, they see extra money.
Yeah.
We're short on money, so
Yeah.
let's spend it. So that makes
Yeah.
sense, but let's also, if we're saying that doesn't feel like the appropriate.
Are there other concerns about this language?
The only other question I had are, we're not resetting the floor on this, right? Like we do with the, our inflator, like every year, you're locked into that, so this doesn't.
This is separate and apart, so, the language,
It's just booster, but it doesn't reset the floor for the next year.
It doesn't
Okay.
make.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
no.
it's in addition to the amounts appropriated under
Yeah.
the regular inflator, and then it provides that the amounts of additional money coming from the pilot fund would not decrease the amount appropriated on that, or be subject to the annual inflationary adjustment.
Okay. Or not perfect, but.
All right, we're gonna take a 7-minute break and try to find out this answer. We're coming back 10:25. Which probably stretched to 30, and we're gonna try to find out the answer to this, and then we'll go back to marking up other options on the T-bill. We're adjourned for the next 7 to 10 minutes.